And then there were two. What a week for Ohio State. And now the Buckeyes will wait through the weekend, potentially, who knows, for JT Tuimoloau and Travion Henderson, the last undecided guys, really, that Ohio State is waiting for heading into this weekend. Marvin Harrison Jr., in a major surprise, I'm sure to everyone, declared for the NFL draft on Thursday. It's got some clarity there. And then we talked about another big-time return with a snap judgment earlier on Thursday. Now we're on to Freaky Friday. It's a podcast daily. Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham. I'm Austin Ward. So we've talked about these guys and the pending decisions, but it feels like, Bill, for the most part, the roster is coming into shape, and we can start to project maybe where there might still be some needs in the transfer portal. And we can pair that with the fact that there might be a fresh batch of meat available coming from Tuscaloosa.
Is that what we're calling them?
I don't know.
Meat. It's really hard. I can't laugh because if I laugh, it turns into a coughing fit. So I'm like trying to stop myself from laughing at that. But yes, there are options emerging, I guess, from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and we'll see whether or not Ohio State pursues any of them aggressively. They should, right? Like I think there aren't, like, in my opinion anyway, there aren't like a bunch of glaring holes on this roster necessarily. There are some spots you have questions about, I think, still, right, on the offensive line. And I guess the one lone safety spot now that does not have a returning starter. Otherwise, I don't know, Berm, if you disagree with me. Like, I don't really know where else you look at this point, right? It seems like they've done a pretty good job of addressing what we thought might be needs by hitting the portal already a little bit, but more importantly, keeping a lot of their guys in-house and not off to the NFL.
Yeah, it was like 7 weeks ago when people started to get very concerned that Ohio State was not immediately getting active in the transfer portal. And the primary reason for that is because they expected a lot of these guys to make their return to Columbus, and they did. And so that narrows down how many spots you have available. But now it's not about what you need. It's about, is there a guy or two out there where you can still make an upgrade? And that has to be the priority for Ohio State. I think it's going to piss off a lot of people around the country that Ohio State, who finished this season on a downturn and on a down note, may very well go into the 2024 season as the preseason number one in the country, because the roster right now might be better than anybody else's that's returning. And if you can find a way to supplement a guy like Lathan Ransom in the secondary next to, I don't know, just spitballing a guy like Caleb Downs, just hypothetically, that's not a projection. It's not a prediction, but it's like, it's out there. It's available. It's transfer meat.
It's the best kind.
You get 30 days to try to lure in that sweet transfer meat. You got to do it. And so it's interesting. Alabama apparently told all of their players, like, give us 3 days to put a coach together. And like, that's pretty aggressive. I don't know that there's a coach out there, no matter who you hire. It's not going to be Dan Lanning, apparently. May not be Steve Sarkisian. I don't know who else is out there that is going to walk into the Alabama locker room and demand the kind of respect that Nick Saban had earned, and have the sort of gravitas that kids are like, oh, I absolutely won't leave because this guy's here. I think every one of those kids that Ohio State's recruited from the Alabama roster are going to at least be open to having a phone call or a conversation, as they should, as they look for their next stop. And the battle between Ohio State and Georgia for guys like Caleb Downs would be pretty fun to watch a third time, I guess, or second time, or however many times it is. But it's not just safety. It's Kadyn Proctor, the true freshman starting tackle at Alabama. That's a guy out there. Olaus Alinen, who didn't play much for the Tide this year, was a player Ohio State recruited pretty aggressively in the class of 2023. So there's offensive linemen and defensive backs up there that are worth looking at. And of course, people will ask about Keon Keeley, but if JT Tuimoloau returns and makes that announcement this weekend, I'm not sure that you have any need for that right now either.
I mean, I guess the answer to this would be kind of obvious, Berm, but if JT leaves, you can reassess, right? And Keon Keeley or whoever else might be able to do the same thing if they're already in the transfer portal. I mean, we can't really say Ohio State would do or not do anything until they know what happens with JT.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like I'm poo-pooing the idea of a guy who was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school a year ago and saying it's like, you don't replace JT Tuimoloau with the 5-star who barely played at Alabama. Like, it's not a like for like trade, but certainly the long-term upside for Keon Keeley, who is a perfect fit for the Buckeye program, would be interesting. I don't know that he has any interest in leaving. I think that if he did, you might have seen that happen already, because he was a player that didn't play at all for Alabama, and a lot of guys like Seth McLaughlin already did transfer after their season ended. So I think that if he had been leaning in that direction, he probably would have already gone into the transfer portal. So I'm not sure that this does a whole lot. I mean, Alabama, I think the interesting thing is what happens to the rest of their coaching staff as their new head coach comes in, because a lot of these kids have chosen to play there not just for Nick Saban, but because of the coach that recruited them.
I think it's a little bizarre. If that's the timeline that Alabama is giving to its roster, hey, just let's get through the weekend. That's one of the 3 best jobs in all of college football, Bill. Like, if you don't have an immediate slam dunk and a replacement lined up, it's unlikely to me that they would move that quickly. Like, the caliber of coaches that we're talking about, are gonna already have good jobs and high buyouts, and maybe neither of those are impediments to taking the Alabama job. But I think there's gonna be some hesitance to go follow Nick Saban immediately, and then the proposition that they're faced when they arrive is, hey, you got to keep the current roster together. They can all leave. You're going to have to go re-recruit all of them. You may not even want all of them. They may not fit your scheme. So you have to figure out how that all is going to work together. You're going to have to keep the signing class together and hire a staff. That stuff, maybe Alabama and Greg Byrne can work an absolute masterclass over the weekend. But that's really a daunting proposition, and it's really not how coaching searches work.
No, I actually, when we first heard the 72-hour thing, I kind of bought it because, and like naively so, because I just thought Dan Lanning was going to take the job. Somebody was texting me earlier on Thursday and said, like, hey, do you think Dan Lanning would actually do this? And I said, I think he's going to do it. And then like 30 seconds later, Oregon announced that he was staying. So it shows what I know, I guess. But I think you're right. It just seems like it's going to take much longer than that. And as Berm said, there's just I think the only coach in college football with the gravitas to walk in there and keep the entire roster intact is Kirby Smart, and he's not going to go there. So they're going to lose players because of this. I know they've already lost at least one high profile commitment because of this. And I guess Alabama is just trying to, buy whatever time they can by asking players to give them a 3-day window until they find a head coach. But it seems borderline impossible to me now that they're going to actually accomplish that. And like for Alabama's sake, it's probably fine that they don't, because I do think you want to be diligent in that process. And it does seem clear to me that they were caught totally off guard by Nick Saban's decision. So, but then that leaves Alabama, I think right for the picking. So programs like Ohio State, Georgia, like the biggest players in the country that want to win national championships, need to aggressively, attack that program now. It's maybe people don't like that's the state of college football, I guess, but that is the state of college football. And when there's blood on the water, you need to go there. And I trust that Ohio State's going to do it, like kick the tires at least, and like try to get in some conversations. It's no guarantee, like Berm said, that they're actually going to get anybody off of that roster, but they've been so aggressive in the portal already. And now this like new shiny opportunity is there that no one was anticipating. I fully expect Ohio State to be aggressive in this regard too.
Yeah, those conversations, a couple of them, at least I know of, have already been planned out, at least. I mean, that started Wednesday night as soon as this news was announced. I think this is the state of college football. This is what happens when there's any sense that there's some turbulence to go through. It also is what happens at a place like Alabama, where Nick Saban has rotated off assistant coaches pretty much at will over the last 4 or 5 years. You don't have somebody in line to be the stabilizer that can step in there in the short term and say, hey, guys, we're going to keep this under control. You'd list Kevin Steele, their longtime defensive coordinator, just retired before Nick Saban did. Like, you don't have your Tommy Rees, I think, is like one of the longest tenured coaches on their coaching staff now, and he's been there a year. So it puts you in a really weird position because you don't have anybody in house that you feel comfortable with that can really settle the turmoil. And that's really good news for everyone else around college football.
So you guys have both dropped these names, and it is my understanding as of right now on Freaky Friday that, and it feels weird to talk about this because they're not in the transfer portal right now as we talk about it. But if that happens, and Ohio State has evaluated Alabama's roster and recruited many of these guys and certainly knows what is on there or could be available, my understanding, and Berm, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that Caleb Downs and Kadyn Proctor, the safety and offensive lineman, respectively, are the only ones that Ohio State would target. Again, they can reevaluate depending on maybe what happens with JT Tuimoloau. A running back situation I don't think would probably be changed, but that's the way that we, at least me, and you can tell me if that's right or wrong, that because of scholarship numbers, because of the financial implications, which they don't have limitless room and they don't have a limitless pile of money, that's where they would focus their efforts. Am I off base with what I'm hearing? Is that what you're hearing?
It's in line. I think there's also at least the potential that if Travion Henderson surprised and decided to go to the NFL, that maybe someone like Justice Haynes or even Richard Young, two guys in the class of 2023 that Ohio State was very, very close to in the recruiting cycle would also be perhaps in line for a brief conversation. The beauty of the internet and all of these pre-existing relationships that recruits have with other recruits is that you don't have to tamper as a coaching staff. You can pretty much find out without really trying whether or not someone's interested in transferring it. So it's not like Ohio State has to go out and send bat signals or anything like that. All it takes is one of the guys on the roster saying, "Hey, buddy, how are you? Are things going okay? Are you feeling a little bit lonely? Do you miss us?" And then you make.
Didn't that just happen with Quinshon Judkins through Davis and Igbinosa?
Yeah, that's exactly how it works now.
So step 2 is, did Ohio State just recently add somebody from Alabama already?
Huh.
I think they did.
Oh,
Seth McLaughlin, right. So you have openings here, and I do think that dependent on what JT Tuimoloau and Travion Henderson do this weekend, and they have to decide what their future is by Sunday night, then you can reassess. But you can find room for Caleb Downs or Kadyn Proctor today, and anyone in the country would find room for them. So I don't think it's like a stretch for people, or should be a stretch for people, to think that those are the two names that would get the most attention.
Let me play devil's advocate for 1 second on Kadyn Proctor. If we're looking at Ohio State's last game of the regular season and Alabama's last game of the year, which of those two teams blocked against Michigan better, and why would one of them need to pillage 2 players from the other offensive line?
It's a fair question. It's ceiling. It's like Kadyn Proctor had an up and down freshman year for sure, but during the course of that year, I definitely showed you what I think he's going to be for the next 2 years, which is a very high level left tackle or right tackle, depending on where he lands. So and then the rest of the offensive line was fine. Like they did find their stride, I think, in the second half of the year. They just didn't have a tremendously good showing against Michigan, which is, a credit to Ohio State's offensive line, I guess, that it did play better against Michigan than Alabama did. But I don't know, I don't look at Ohio State's offensive line room and see a lot of guys that have first round ceilings like Kadyn Proctor does, or even someone maybe like Olas Allen, who Ohio State recruited too, who I don't think is necessarily looking, or I guess he's looking for an opportunity to start because everybody is, but he's a freshman now. Like, he could conceivably come to a place like Ohio State, sit for a year, and then in 2025 start for the first time in his third year. So I think, 1, Ohio State needs as much offensive line competition as possible, and 2, needs more players in its room with higher ceilings, I think, than it has currently. So that's why I think they're worth taking, even if you would measure up Alabama's last game and Ohio State's game against Michigan and think to yourself that Ohio State's offensive line performed better.
I'm not going to pretend I didn't have 7 or 8 makers marks during that Michigan-Alabama game, but my recollection is that a lot of Michigan's pass...
Was it 7 or 8?
A lot of Michigan's pass rush success came as a result of blitzing linebackers and other positions, and I put some of that stuff on the quarterback not picking up the blitz as opposed to the offensive line. And I thought Alabama actually ran the ball fairly well against Michigan for the majority of the second half anyway. Second quarter, third quarter, they ran the ball pretty well. So the bottom line, what Bill said is right, though. Like, if you look at the Ohio State roster and you ask yourself, okay, look at these offensive linemen, is there one guy here you think is, with the right development, with the right weight room, a first-round pick? And I'm not sure that you have that conversation. Maybe Luke Montgomery. We'll see what he develops into, but I don't know that you have that with anyone else other than Donovan Jackson, who was going to need to take a major step forward in his fourth year. And as a guard, it's hard to be a first-round pick anyway. So at tackle, at Kadyn Proctor, you don't start at Alabama as a true freshman offensive tackle unless there's a reason for it. Some of that reason is because their offensive line was struggling. Some of that reason is because he's got the upside and the physical talent to be one of the best in the country without much improvement. And he will continue to improve. So I do understand the devil's advocate approach there, but let's just take a look. That's, take a look, bud.
Check tape. He said check tape.
He was also, it's interesting. Kadyn Proctor did not have Ohio State in his top 7 schools when he made the decision to narrow down his list. He did not really consider Ohio State after Greg Studrara left. He did not have a very good relationship with Greg Studrara. Justin Fry could not close the gap. So I don't know if he would even be interested. But again, these are the conversations you at least have. It's not the same thing as Kadyn or Caleb Downs, who Ohio State was the clear-cut runner-up in his recruitment.
I don't do a lot of I don't do nearly as much recruiting interviews as Berm does. I used to do more of them than I do now, and I did go to Kadyn Proctor's high school a couple of years ago. I think it was after Ohio State played at Nebraska. I drove because I'm a maniac, and on the way back, I stopped in Des Moines to go to Southeast Polk to talk to Kadyn Proctor and to Xavier Wampa, who were both being recruited by Ohio State at the time. And Kadyn Proctor is on the short list of high school players that I've talked to that Ohio State was recruiting, in air quotes, that 2 minutes into the conversation is yeah, there's no way this kid's going to Ohio State. It was clear that he had little to no interest in going to Ohio State. It was either going to be stay home or go to Alabama. But that doesn't mean they can't get back in now. But it's just funny to me, Ohio State's involved, and then you go talk to a kid, it's this kid's not coming here.
He had zero interest in playing for Greg Studrara. Period.
Yeah.
And then Justin Fry could not rally the troops at the end. I mean, if I'm Ohio State, I still find a way to see if Xavier Wampa is bored at Iowa. I mean, there's one of these guys. Bring them both home. Bring them both back to Ohio. It's 4 letters and there's a bunch of vowels. Just do it. It's the same place.
I'm not sure I agree with any of that part, but I don't really want to advocate for the devil in that regard because I agree with everything that you said. And I think we keep talking a lot about, and the same thing is about to be said with what Caleb Downs would allow Ohio State to do defensively, to move 2 people down a spot with Sonny Styles to linebacker potentially and CJ Hicks to the defensive line or edge or jack or whatever. That could also apply for Ohio State and why I think they're continuing to look for a tackle is that maybe that is the best spot for Josh Fryer and the best alignment of 5 moving forward. I don't know. A lot of this conversation that we've talked about recently with Ohio State and figuring things out with that group has been well, can Tegra get into the lineup? Where does Luke Montgomery fit into this equation? It may require a veteran tackle, and maybe this spring will show that Tegra Chabola and Luke Montgomery can make that irrelevant. Who knows? But I think it's more likely than not that Josh Fryer would, with his physical development, probably stay ahead of those guys. And if they're all competing at guard, I don't think it would be out of question at all for him to emerge from that spot and solidify with 2 seniors with Donovan Jackson and Josh Fryer on either side at guard. That seems like it would be a win for Ohio State. Now, does that mean that they're going to get Kadyn Proctor? Absolutely not. He's not in the portal. We don't know what's going to happen there. But I think that's part of this conversation with why the search in the portal is probably more focused on tackle than a guard.
Yeah, I think it should be, right. I agree with you. I'm of the mind that Josh Fryer probably needs to move inside to guard. And then whether you want to have a spring competition at right tackle with the rest of the guys on your roster or bring somebody in before that, I guess that could be tricky given the academic calendar at this point. I think that's fine. That's kind of what they did last year. And they kind of went through spring with what they had and then realized they needed more and got more. Maybe you need to act with more urgency with a guy like Kadyn Proctor if he does in fact enter the portal. But I do think they still need to add another tackle, even if it's not Kadyn Proctor.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're in a world now where if a kid is not sold on the fact that he's going to enter the transfer portal, you can find a way to entice him to get there. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
What's the way?
It's money.
Oh, 7 or 8 makers marks.
It's 7 or 8 makers marks. Yes. Perfect. Just get them sauced up. Come on up to Columbus and drink Maker's Mark with Berm. That's the ultimate.
I don't believe Kadyn Proctor is old enough to enjoy a
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, we don't want to violate any laws.
They should make a special exception for people who are 6'7" and 350 pounds. Like, he can drink.
Yeah. It won't affect him. It won't affect him at all. He's like Thor.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not advocating for this. I'm anti this. No.
Okay.
Oh. So he's on for good vibes and he's not for underage drinking. What a change 2024 has brought to Berm.
Berm famously never had a sip of alcohol until he was 21.
It's true.
When was your first sip of alcohol? Both of you?
I mean, first sip, I was like 6, but I mean,
when was your first purposeful alcoholic beverage?
I never really imbibed until I was a senior in high school, and I was 18 very early in my senior year. So I consider myself an adult at that time. So,
I think I was like 15.
15. All right.
Yeah, but then like I didn't like it, and then probably not. Dude, when I was kids that I grew up with like started drinking in like 7th grade, but I was not about that life.
Your dad was a cop, whipped your ass.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So I didn't do that, but yeah, probably like 15, and then after that, probably not again until I was like 18 or 19. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. How about you?
My first purposeful beers were when I was 13, and then I was like, this is pretty dumb, and didn't do it again until college. And I like bought into the honor pledge to be able to stay on all the very successful teams at Kelly Walsh High School. So I did not drink throughout high school, went full teetotaler. And then that changed the second that I arrived in Laramie, Wyoming. That was out the window. Back to Ohio State football. Sorry for the wild divergence off course there. You talked about Caleb Downs' recruitment, Berm. So Ohio State had a good relationship, could potentially reignite one again if he goes into the portal. What was the ultimate deciding factor, and why could the Buckeyes win if they get a second chance?
He wanted to play in a good defense, and Ohio State didn't have one when he was being recruited. And that's pretty much the bottom line. He was recruited primarily by Tim Walton and Perry Eliano. Tim Walton has some ties with his father, with Gary Downs. That helped open the door for Ohio State. And that is still obviously there, even though Ohio State just made a decision to not retain Perry Eliano. It is a situation where you did have McArary being somewhat involved in his recruitment early on as well. So it's not like he's a brand new guy that he wouldn't know. He certainly was involved and had conversations with Matt and between Matt and Caleb when Caleb was on campus for his official visit, for his visit that he made in November of 2022. But really, it's about putting a defense on the field where Jim Knowles can now say, look, this is what our defense actually is, and this is how a guy like you fits, because the year prior, the safeties in a safety-driven defense were driving the defense off the road, and that's not the case anymore. So that's why at least I think you can look at it from a stepping back and saying, hey, there's at least a shot here because you've seen success now in this defense. Better than Alabama defense.
Right. Bill, do you have any thoughts about if he is better suited for one spot in the other if you're working with Lathan Ransom?
No, I mean, I think Caleb Downs can play any position you want to put him in. I do think it would work out nicely for Caleb to come play the adjuster and Lathan to play the bandit. Like, I think that would work out great. I think Caleb Downs is going to be the top safety in college football for the next 2 years and then be like, at worst, the 10th pick in the draft after he leaves. Like, he is a special safety who got incredibly improved dramatically over the course of the season. Because if you watch him early in the year when he was starting, there were some hiccups there, I think, but by the end of the year, he was awesome. So I think if you put him in this defense, he can play anywhere. As it pertains like the personnel they have coming back, Lathan at the bandit, Caleb Downs at the adjuster, and Jordan Hancock at the nickel is about as good as it gets, I think, for a starting safety trio.
Return guy as well. So you add other elements.
Oh yeah. If a special teams coordinator, chose to do that.
Yeah. If you have players like him, you don't really need a special teams coordinator. You just say, don't and do something. The end.
Yeah.
I'm going to pretend like none of the last 30 seconds just happened and not talk about special teams right now. because that will keep the good vibes going into the weekend. What a crazy week. One of the busier ones I can remember covering Ohio State in a while, and a lot of good news for them with all of the guys electing to return. Some movement going on there with the coaching staff as well, and that will also continue throughout the weekend. But the deadline is looming for JT Tuimoloau and Travion Henderson, so we will stay tuned and stay glued to that and have any coverage that we can provide when those decisions come down. But we appreciate you hanging out with us all week long with all the snap judgments, all the podcast dailies, everything else. Kings of Columbus, there's been some Kings of the North going on with Bill and Doug. We appreciate if you've watched one show or all of them, thank you for hanging out with us. It's been the Podcast Daily for Freaky Friday. For Bill and Berm, I'm Austin. See you later. Have a great weekend.